In October of 2024, Bloober Team released their highly anticipated remake of Silent Hill 2. I say highly anticipated, but if you've watched my video on what the hubbub was around the game even in the summer prior to its release, you'd know that highly anticipated went hand in hand with highly derided, even before it ever released. Part of that was because of reactionaries flipping out over things that turned out to not be a problem at all, actually, a result of being part of what I think is a reactionary echo chamber within the gaming community, and partly because many had felt that Bloober's prior releases were an indication that they weren't up to the task. I've never played their games prior to the Silent Hill 2 remake, so I can't speak to that on a personal level, but their reputation was decidedly mixed. After the remake came out and the majority of players understood how faithful and incredible the game was, again, I have a full series on this in great detail, many took this as an indication that Bloober Team was amazing after all, and that their future was obviously very secure. However, as others pointed out, Bloober didn't write Silent Hill 2. The story and characters already existed. They just needed to remake it for modern hardware and use modern graphics and seasoned voice actors. Sure, they made some changes to dialogue and padded out some of the gameplay, but besides some of the gripes I had with this, mostly pacing in the later sections, I thought they did great. The proof, however, would be what they made moving forward. Not long after the release of Silent Hill 2 Remake, Bloober Team released a trailer for their upcoming survival horror game, Cronos: The New Dawn. From the moment that trailer released, I was hooked. I could not wait to play it, and it came out almost a year later in September of 2025. Unfortunately for me, I had pre-ordered the physical edition, which got delayed by 2 weeks. That's part of why this review is so late coming out. That, and I spent an inordinate amount of time finishing my Silent Hill 2 series in time for the 1-year anniversary on October 8th. However, now that I've had the time to finish Cronos and do everything I wanted to do, except clear hard mode just because I don't feel like it right now and I'd rather finally get started on Silent Hill F, how did I feel about the game? Did it live up to the hype, or did it turn out to be yet another lackluster game for the Polish studio? Cronos: The New Dawn takes place in a ruined future in what used to be Poland. Players take control of someone only referred to as the Traveler, wearing the equivalent of an old-school diver suit, which is fitting since the core gameplay involves going to dive points, which allows the Traveler to go back in time to the 80s when everything went down the crapper and a virulent disease ran rampant through the region and, presumably, into the outside world. People became fused together and transformed into monstrous entities, and in many cases, forming into large clumps of organic material simply called biomass. Our heroine travels into the past to extract certain individuals for the sake of adding them to something known only as the Collective. Wait, did I say heroine? Why, yes, I did. And if you thought, I bet there are some reactionary weirdos that are going to have a problem with this, you would be correct. There were quite a few people I saw online whining about how this was a bait and switch, and because it was a female protagonist, they weren't going to play it. These are the same people, grums, who will then turn around and say they never said they wouldn't play a game with a female protagonist, only that they hated how many modern female protagonists were made these days, even if you can clearly find posts that these people make where they make no such distinction. Again, echo chamber. I sometimes wonder if these people would have hated the original Metroid after beating it for the best ending and finding out Samus was, in fact, a woman. I mean, they wouldn't have since she was in a bikini in all of its 8-bit glory, so that makes the fact that she's female okay. But if she was slightly average looking or, God forbid, the dreaded mid, all hell would break loose. X and Reddit were mistakes. Of course, in Cronos, nobody is hiding the ball here. It's obvious from her first lines that this is a female character. It wasn't a surprise simply because the original trailer didn't have her speak. Anyway, I'm not going to tangent on this. I think it's a stupid reason not to play the game, and fortunately this seems to be a pretty minority view here, and fortunately, Cronos hasn't seemed to suffer because of it, nor should it. After extracting her first target, the Traveler meets with another figure known as the Warden, who says he's there to guide travelers on their mission and says he's also working to fix the terminal that allows travelers to allow their extracted essences to ascend and join the collective. The game follows the same formula more or less for each area. Extract a target, return to the terminal, get some exposition, and then proceed to the next area either by having to power a tram or hike through wasted landscape. Along the way, you can find other deceased travelers who may have their own essences still trapped in their system that you can take for yourself. However, you can only hold 3 at any given time, so if you want to swap one out, you'll have to permanently erase another one. This isn't just a lighthearted thing either, since the essences you erase will basically scream in agony when they're deleted, so enjoy that.
Essence acquired.
Each essence has some sort of perk tied to it, such as increased damage to burning enemies. The essences you end the game with can also affect what trophies you get, and one set of 3 gets you one ending, while keeping only the 3 story-related essences gets you another. Speaking of endings, there are 3 altogether. Once you get to the final save point before the final boss and then defeat the final boss, you can choose one of the 2 endings. You could then reload, beat the boss, and choose the other one. Ending 3 is exclusive to New Game Plus, so if you want to minimize the number of playthroughs to get all 3 endings, get both on your first playthrough, and then complete it again on New Game Plus Hard Mode for the 3rd one. As for the rest of the gameplay, this is good old-fashioned survival horror. I do not mean that this is like Resident Evil 4 Remake or even some other survival horror games that are really more action games with a horror aesthetic. And to be fair, RE4 Remake did a good job of having that balance between action and survival horror during your first playthrough with inventory management, but even then, resources didn't feel terribly scarce on normal difficulties. I understand Professional was a bit more challenging, especially on a clean save file. However, I'm more thinking of the original Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2, where inventory was much more limited at the beginning and resource management was much more important than later installments. I seem to remember the original Resident Evil 3 being pretty rough at times too, but it's been probably pushing 30 years since I played it on the original PlayStation, so my memory is a bit fuzzy. Cronos starts you with very limited inventory space. Ammo is quite scarce, and enemies hit like a truck. Generally speaking, you can only take about 3 hits from enemies until you die, unless you upgrade your health. The larger enemies and fused versions of enemies hit even harder, which makes it even more imperative to not get hit. Also, there's no dodge button, so have fun with that too. Now, the question we have to ask is this: is Cronos the New Dawn difficult? Well, there's no difficulty setting at all. It seems to have sort of the adaptive difficulty that Resident Evil 4 Remake had, and I think there are probably others, even if I can't think of any off the top of my head that I've played. Regardless, the general consensus that I've seen online is that Cronos is actually quite difficult. The amount of complaints I saw where people just said they were uninstalling because it was too hard was surprising. And then you had the people who said the game was the easiest survival horror game they've ever played, as though it should have been called Baby's First Survival Horror and come with a pacifier. I saw quite a few say that on their first run they either died 0 times and had stockpiles of ammo left over, or that they only died at most 4 or 5 times to the last 2 bosses. These people annoy me. To be fair, one said they had also mastered doing multiple S-rank professional runs with Leon on either RE2 or RE4, so that makes sense. For the rest of us who haven't dedicated our lives to mastering a certain game or genre, then Cronos can be sufficiently challenging. I'm not going to tell you how many times I died on my first playthrough, because even I'm thoroughly embarrassed by how many times I kept getting killed. And yes, there were times I wanted to rage quit, but I'm here to tell you that I persevered, adapted, and overcame. Still, I have some thoughts about the game's balance that are not unique to me, having been echoed by many others. Cronos feels like it wants to be 2 things at the same time. First, it wants to be a slow-paced survival horror game that delivers on an intense atmosphere and emphasis on resource management, pushing players to be almost perfect with every shot to not waste ammo, and a thoroughly challenging survival horror experience for the average person. I think it does all of that exceptionally well. The environments, the atmosphere, sound design, and the resource scarcity, and the need to master the game's mechanics is spot on. I haven't played a survival horror game like this in a long time, and that's probably what led to me dying an inordinate amount of times. I had forgotten how to take it slow and easy and be hyper aware of my surroundings. However, the problem is that there are times that the game really wants to be something like Dead Space, when you get bombarded with multiple enemies all of a sudden and you've acquired barely enough ammo to survive. Again, it's been a very long time since I've played the original Resident Evil games, or even, for example, the original Silent Hill 1, but I don't recall any of those games just having constant rooms of enemies where you get ambushed by several enemies at once. Not to say there weren't some of those sections, but in many cases you could simply run past the enemies and get out of the area if you needed to. Most of the time that's not an option here, and you're forced to fight your way out. Now, to be fair, that's not to say that every ambush is entirely unexpected. If you've played any other survival game, or if you've played through Silent Hill 2 remakes especially, you'll already be familiar with the tried and true, also known as overused, trope of getting a key item and then having to fight your way out of an area. Now, there are several cases where you can't really prep for this. Let me explain. Throughout Cronos are numerous safe rooms where you can store items in your shared storage container, upgrade weapons, purchase ammo or crafting materials, and save your game. In addition, each safe room has a fuel canister dispenser. One of the traveler's abilities is to use a flamethrower attachment to torch dead bodies to prevent other enemies from merging with them and becoming stronger versions of themselves. One of the upgrades is that you can craft and hold a stack of 2 fuel containers in a slot instead of just 1. However, dispensers only ever give you 1 canister if you have none on hand. It will never give you 2. So, if you hit a safe room and as you're going along you find an area that has a lot of bodies, you can always backtrack to the safe room and run back and forth torching everything in sight. There is no limit to how many times the dispenser will give you torch fuel, so you can repeat this as many times as you need to. It can be tedious, but it's worth it to prevent enemies from merging, which is, after all, one of the key mechanics of the game. However, as I'm sure you know, not all of these bodies are actually dead, and some are just playing possum. Fortunately, not too far into the game, you get an attachment for your weapon that will light up when you aim it at an enemy that has health. It does not matter if they are up and moving around, and it always displays if an enemy has health. What this means is that if you see a bunch of enemies on the ground or slumped over and you aim your gun at them, you'll know whether the enemy is truly dead or if it's just pretending. This will help you get the drop on enemies by shooting them first before they get up. Now, in some cases this will trigger the other enemies to get up and begin coming after you as well, but in other cases it will just be the one enemy. It sort of just depends on the area and how it's set up for that encounter. Regardless, this is probably my favorite feature of the game. As much crap as I gave the Silent Hill 2 remake for having too many ambush sections in the game and using the same trope, it wasn't as annoying here because I could quickly single out which enemies were faking it and start blasting them before they could do anything. Speaking of shooting enemies, this is where the difficulty happened for me. I do want to point out that most of the people who are claiming it was a baby game or that they just had zero issues with it at all were on Steam. For console, things were a little different. Aiming with your pistol early on is sort of a chore. Well, let me rephrase that. Using the charged shot for your starting pistol is a chore because it's not the most stable weapon. Fortunately, you can upgrade the stability of the gun and just about all weapons, honestly, to where there isn't as much sway when you're aiming. I mention this only because there are weak spots on enemies, mostly red areas, especially on the head, that you can shoot to take them down with fewer shots. From what I can gather, playing with mouse and keyboard makes hitting these spots a little easier, whereas controller is just a little more difficult. I played my initial run and New Game Plus run with no aim assist, but by the time I got my pistol fully upgraded, it just about didn't matter. Even if you don't go for a headshot, you can do the old tried and true RE4 technique of taking out an enemy's leg and then attacking them on the ground to save ammo. That's actually about the only thing melee is good for besides interrupting an enemy that is trying to merge. Seriously, as good as this game is with making your character just feel heavy, making everything feel like it has weight to it, your melee attacks feel like you're just gently slapping a wet paper bag against a concrete wall when it comes to how it feels to hit an enemy. Regardless, stomping them a few times on the ground usually is enough to get their health low enough to where you should only need about one more shot to finish them off, though I'm basing that on mostly using fully upgraded weapons. Toward the end of my second playthrough, I did decide to mess around with aim assist. Fully cranked up, it's laughable how easy it is to hit enemy weak points and get headshots. The downside is it's almost too strong, and it'll automatically snap your aim towards crates and explosives. This can really screw you up if you're trying to kite enemies towards an explosive barrel, and it won't let you target the barrel since the aim assist is trying to lock you onto a leg or arm or something. Honestly, if you're having trouble there, setting it to mild or the lowest assist setting should be sufficient to accommodate for controller jank. Having said all that, the real difficulty does tend to come from the ability to manage resources, which includes hitting weak spots and not wasting shots. Ammo is precious, and even though you can craft it or buy it, your materials can also be used to craft healing items or fuel for your flamethrower. It's important to understand that every upgrade you buy is less money you can spend on ammo and vice versa. That said, you can respec your weapons anytime, so if you're truly desperate and need to get back money you spent on upgrades in order to buy ammo, you can, but I don't recommend it. Those upgrades are vital. I don't remember ever having a situation where I didn't have enough resources to get through an area or survive an ambush. Most of my deaths were from my own bad positioning and taking more risks than I needed to instead of playing it safe, and the game absolutely punished me for that. Still, I go back to my complaint about the game not being able to decide whether or not it wanted to be old-fashioned survival horror or Dead Space. That's not to say it ruined the game, but there were several times where I was just not enjoying the game.
Bro, I'm straight up not having a good time.
Though most of that was at the beginning. As you get upgrades and learn the game better, it's not as bad. I know some have decried the lack of difficulty options, but I think the learning curve is fair if, you actually learn from your mistakes, which the game flat out tells you to do. Not much else to say here. Storytelling is mostly done through finding documents and audio recordings. Oh, and you can find and pet cats. There are 10 in all, and if you don't go out of your way to save them all, you're as much of a monster as the ones you kill in-game. Just saying.
An exceptionally handsome specimen. Yes, you are.
The main cutscenes and dialogue only do so much to communicate the story of Cronos, the New Dawn. The downside of this is that you can literally miss 99% of the world and story of Cronos if you just blitz through the game. However, if you're playing a survival horror game, you should be exploring every last nook and cranny for resources anyway. So if you miss out on all this, that's more of a skill issue than a problem with the game itself. There's a lot the documents and narrative tells you about what has happened, but there is enough they leave mysterious for you to try and figure it out yourself. That said, even if you do find everything and get all 3 endings, the endings themselves are, well, mildly disappointing. I hate saying that too, because I feel like that's a disservice to the story itself. What I mean is this. The first 2 endings both show something somewhat similar. Without getting into spoilers, it shows 2 different events that both lead to the same outcome. Ending 3 is sort of the path that breaks this thing from happening, but it ends without any real resolution. It feels like it's setting up for a sequel, which, in this case, I think needs to happen so we can get more answers about several plot threads that aren't resolved. And while I'm looking forward to that, part of me also wishes that the story had been fully self-contained so that, should something catastrophic happen and a sequel never gets made, we aren't left with all of these questions left unanswered. I don't want to have another repeat of Legacy of Kain Defiance. It's been over 20 years, for the love of heaven, and that story still isn't completed. I've literally had dreams where I played a sequel only to wake up and hate the fact that no final story entry actually exists. Anyway, my point is that I like that they have hopes of revisiting the IP because I think it has a lot of potential, but I also worry about things not getting resolved. I've been hurt too many times to trust again. One other issue I had was the pacing. The first time I went through the game, I didn't really notice this. I was just busy trying to survive and trying to find every collectible and scrap of ammunition and resources I could to make it through the game. However, on New Game Plus, where I was just rushing through it to upgrade more weapons prior to hard mode and to just get the true ending, I started to become aggravated with how long it was taking to make it from one area to the next. Once you get the first essence, you have to progress to the steelworks, but first you have to reactivate the tram, which requires you to go turn on 2 electrical switches, fight through enemies, and then make it back to the tram before getting on to the next true zone of the story. Think of it like the next major dungeon in an RPG. Then you get back to the main terminal with the warden, and then you have to make your way through some other long, meandering pathway to get to the hospital. After the hospital, you end up back with the warden, and in order to get to the next area, the Abbey, you have to once again start up a different tram, which feels like it takes even longer to do than the first tram did,
This is getting repetitive.
complete with its own boss fight. Now, maybe it's just because I was trying to rush through my NG Plus playthrough, but I was really kind of annoyed with doing this all a second time. Still, to be fair, I did say that the first time through the game, this didn't really bother me all that much. I was fully immersed in trying to survive and figure out how to adapt to what was going on. Unfortunately, after doing all that the first time, the second time felt like a slog at points because I didn't care about the areas outside the main zones. I didn't want to be in the subway area trying to activate the tram. I wanted to be in the steelworks. I didn't want to wander around all these destroyed and ruined roads and back pathways. I wanted to already be in the hospital. I for sure didn't want to have to turn on a second tram just to go to the Abbey, and even then, once I got to the area, I didn't want to have to hike even further just to get there. This was sort of the problem with Silent Hill 2 Remake. The first time I played through the prison and the labyrinth, I really enjoyed them. On subsequent playthroughs, I just felt like they were taking too long. Is that because Bloober Team could have trimmed some of the fat off of these areas? Or is it just because I was trying to make it through in as little time as possible to finish a particular run, and I was becoming unreasonably impatient with the game? I really don't have an answer to that, but I know at the time, there were moments I just kept thinking to myself, man, I wish this section didn't exist. Still, I don't want to dump all of that on the developers, since I'm at least self-aware enough to realize that may have just been a me problem. Now, I know at this point, it sounds like I'm just trashing the game, but I'm really not. Cronos: The New Dawn does so many things incredibly well. While the story isn't going to win any awards or anything, I think it was pretty interesting for a survival horror game, and I thoroughly enjoyed the setting and the atmosphere. I enjoyed piecing things together through the various documents and travelogues, and I think the voice acting was well done. All of the major elements of the story and world building were awesome as far as I'm concerned. The difficulty, I feel, is a bit imbalanced for reasons I specified earlier. However, I think if I had maybe used the lowest aim assist, maybe that could have helped. As I said before, that could just be one of those things that comes with using a controller over mouse and keyboard. I do agree that parts of Cronos have an identity crisis between being a slow, methodical, and tension-filled survival horror and an action horror game that stresses you out because you burn through all the ammo the game has given you to that point. Then again, if you're someone who eats, sleeps, and breathes this genre to the point of doing blindfolded, no damage S-rank professional runs in Resident Evil 4 with a left-handed Guitar Hero controller, this probably won't be an issue. If you really want difficulty options and not having them as a game breaker, I understand. I will say that once I beat the game the first time and finally got good at the game, it was a very rewarding experience. If you've been struggling with the game, stick with it. You'll eventually have a breakthrough and overcome the struggle, and you'll feel great about it. There's also the aforementioned pacing issues that may or may not have just been a me issue, but given how I had similar thoughts about some of how Silent Hill 2 Remake padded things, I don't think Bloober Team is entirely off the hook. Overall, difficulty spikes and minor pacing issues aside, I think Bloober did a fantastic job with Cronos: The New Dawn, and shows that they've learned a lot over the years, especially after their experience with the Silent Hill 2 remake. They aren't perfect by any stretch, but no dev studio is, and I continue to look forward to seeing how they do. I'm hoping they continue to learn from their mistakes, and I'm interested to see what they eventually do with Silent Hill 1, and I hope one day to see them revisit this world and continue the story they began here. That's going to be it for me. I'm working on Silent Hill F now, so I'll eventually have that up and done, but I don't know when. Probably not soon enough to be considered timely, but that's usually how it goes with me, what with having a real job outside of this and a family. Anyway, I'll talk to you all again soon, and I may have some other stuff I'll upload besides just gaming content, but in the meantime, you all take care, and I'll talk to you again soon.